Have you ever wondered why some leaders seem to have everyone on their side? It ain't magic, it's masterful communication. Today I'm going to talk about how that can happen with you too. Now today we're going to unlock the real tips and secrets to really getting that right level of communication and engagement when it comes to your stakeholders. And of course, I like to have a little bonus at the end. I want to talk about how you can really unearth this in more challenging situations. Hi, my name is Michael Tabirade, leadership and performance coach. And whether you're watching this via YouTube or listening to this via podcast, today I'm going to be continuing the leadership theme, talking about stakeholder communications. How do you really unearth good communications with your stakeholders, and how do you create that right level of influence effectively? Now, of course, when you're dealing with stakeholders, it's very important to identify who your stakeholders are, okay? Now, of course, this leans really nicely into developing a good stakeholder plan, okay? Stakeholder communications plan. Now, I've been in many different organizations where I've led on some sort of program or implementation, and there is no clear way to understand how to communicate. So the first thing comes down to, who are my stakeholders? And so when I did my whole change management qualification, I learned this really neat trick. Okay, it's not really a trick, it's more of an acronym. And it stands for CPIG. CPIG stands for customers, providers, influencers, and governors. Now, what does this really mean? Customers are the people you're serving. These are the individuals who you are doing the program or works for, okay? So think about it. When you're doing some sort of organization-wide transformation program, your customers are the staff. When you are developing a product or service as a business owner, your customers are the people who are likely to buy, the people who have the problem and your product or service solves that problem. So customers are really important. The second one is centered around providers. So providers are the people who are doing the implementing, okay? So that's your team. So think about your project managers or your program managers or whomever it is, your delivery managers who are actually delivering this stuff. Then you have influencers. These people have the power, okay, to make changes. They could say one thing and all of a sudden policies change it, you know? So influencers are usually people within a senior position. They could be someone of an executive level, but not necessarily directly involved in your stream of work. Now, of course, they don't always have to be necessarily of a certain seniority. They can, in fact, be individuals who are seen as ambassadors. So if you have people who are early adopters, okay, or innovators when it comes to that whole bell curve of, you know, innovation and taking things on, these people, if they're loud and proud enough, they can influence and shape how things work. And so you'll have various different stakeholders, but the thing to do here is to have someone or yourself, depending on how big your organization is, to essentially track this stuff aligned to CPIG. And you can really measure, you know, the power of each different level, okay? Or how frequently you need to communicate with these different individuals. So when it comes to this stuff, identifying your stakeholders are really key. But secondly, it helps you understand how you can tailor your communications towards these individuals. Why is this important? Because it means that you are taking on board sensitivities and you're showing empathy towards the people that you're communicating towards. And so it's really important here that you have some level of what they call a steering group. So this is just a group of people who have certain different expertise or archetypes within your world where you can ask them questions and it will help inform how you do things. That's why it's called a steering group. They kind of steer and influence your direction, so to speak. So remember, identify your stakeholders, use CPIG, track this information and speak to them to understand how you can tailor your communications and make your engagement effective. The second thing to think about is the art of persuasive communication, okay? Now, what do I mean by this? Now, of course, when thinking about communication and thinking about change within an organization or a business or whatever it may be, you have to think about who are you affecting? Of course, there are 7 stages to the cycle of change that people experience. Okay, so I'm going to use my notes as a reference here. So you got shock, denial, awareness, acceptance, experimentation, searching, and integration. this is what the people who are being affected by change are feeling. They feel shocked. They're like, oh my gosh, can't believe this is happening. And then they may be in some level of denial, okay, where it's just like, nah, I'm not even going to do anything. I'm just going to ignore it. I'm going to ignore the messages, etc., etc. Then they move into a state of awareness where they're learning more about this stuff. And this is where you have to understand that there is going to be resistance at the beginning. You have to understand that's just part of the cycle. People will be at different stages. You need to find the individuals who are more likely wanting to innovate or be early adopters so you can bring them on board to help with that persuasive communication. This is how you do it. And so you seek out these people. You have these different webinars or workshops or meetings, okay, where you talk about the change. They call it the ADKAR process in change management. You create that sense of awareness. So it's all about awareness building, making people aware, having frequent communication so they're aware, and they have the ability to ask questions where you start to develop that sense of desire. Okay, this is where the acceptance comes into play, okay, which was, I think, stage 4. And so once they have that deep-seated desire through you answering their questions and giving them this sense of awareness, then you move into knowledge, okay, or you move into a space where you're training people to do some of this stuff and they take action on some of this knowledge that they're developing. And then you just reinforce this stuff where they start sort of like moving into stages 5, 6, and 7, okay, of the 7 stages of change that people go through. So understanding this stuff is really important. Now, when you're communicating this stuff, you have to think about the person. Identifying your audience at the beginning is really important for this. And really, I'm going to go back to the Greek times, okay? Thinking of stuff that makes a communication really effective. So there's something known as ethos, pathos, and logos. Now, ethos is all centered around this sense of credibility, so to speak, okay? So how are you showing your sense of authority? Like, why should people trust what you're saying? So this is where you may use data or your credentials or expertise or whatever it may be to really solidify what you're saying. So it's important to structure your conversation. People know where this is coming from or who this is coming from. Then there is pathos. You want to use emotion, okay? And emotion is evoked in many different ways. It could be done through humor, but not folly. It could be done through stories, but not just continuous talking about the good old days and all this stuff. All of this stuff is trying to create relatability. This is what you want to do. You want to be relatable. And so stories unearth this. This is where you may get good testimonials from others who have gone through an alpha or beta program. So basically testing this stuff in order to, again, get that communication. Finally, we have logos, which is where you're logical and rational, okay? You're using science, or you're being very reasoned, or step by step, which allows people to understand the rationale behind why you're doing what you're doing. And so when thinking about persuasive communication, we want to think about those different things there, okay? Now, I remember a time when I was working for an organization. They knew nothing about, managing successful programs, so to speak. They had some knowledge, of course. And so I needed to get them on board. How did I do this? Well, I simply listened to what they had to say for 2 weeks. I assimilated all of this information and I got the key themes, and I delivered a workshop that enabled them to understand what good looks like. And it was undeniable because I had all of their issues and problems the first 2 weeks, and I mirrored that to what good looks like from a methodology standpoint. And I was using a methodology and framework that had been tried and tested in many other organizations and is globally known. That's how I influenced them to embed and take on board this new way of delivery. And so when thinking about this stuff, it's really important to listen to what people have to say first before you make any changes or whatever it may be. So good, artful communication with your stakeholders may look something like that. I also want to talk about good listening. Listening is underrated. There's this whole saying that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, okay? So you need to be able to listen intently. Now, we don't just listen with our ears. We kind of listen with our eyes too. And what I mean by that is observe behavior, okay? understand the vibe, use a bit of your intuition. What are the different things that you're picking up from what people are saying, how they're saying, and what they're saying? This is all very important stuff, because listening is the ability to interpret information effectively and then saying something that is in the line of inquiry of what have just been said. I can't believe I just said all that stuff, but I did. Okay? The point being made is you need to listen well to communicate effectively, to speak, to say what's on your mind in accordance to what has just been said. And so this is where active listening comes into play. This is where you're making the conscious effort to really take in what somebody is saying or what other people are saying. And this requires a lot of stuff, because when you're listening, there is going to be bias. It's called the arc of distortion. There's going to be some sort of distortion that happens in your mind. Your mind filters things naturally. But it's about making sure that is minimized in such a way so you can break up the information, really analyze it, evaluate it, comprehend it and understand it, and then say something that's conducive to what has just been said. A lot of stuff going on there. You practice this by not talking. You practice this by mirroring people. You practice this by summarizing stuff or paraphrasing. You practice this by asking a question to check for your understanding. That's how you practice good and active listening. So when thinking about this, think about some of those different exercises. Now, I want you to think about a recent stakeholder, somebody that you've worked with, somebody that maybe you're managing an account for, whatever it may be. What was that interaction like? Was it a good one or was it a poor one? Let me know your comments below. I'd love to hear your stories so that we can learn from each other. Just one moment before you continue the video. If you're interested in gaining more information surrounding how you can develop as a leader, how you can employ good life management, more stuff centered around portfolio careers, then you may want to sign up for my newsletter, the Mastery Leadership newsletter, where I talk about some of this stuff. I'll give you tips and tricks and hints and things around all of this stuff in order for you to be an effective leader, whether this is in your business, in your workplace, or even in your family household. Look, leadership is really important. Life management is really important, and all of us are cultivating portfolio careers. I think they said by 2025, at least 50% of people, at least in the UK, are going to have some sort of portfolio career. So if these topics really interest you, especially the leadership stuff, then make sure you sign up for my newsletter where you can get weekly information on this and just feel up to date in terms of how you can be the best leader that you can be, where I define leadership as living by example. Anyway, let's get back to the video. Now, the other thing to consider is handling difficult conversations. Now, everyone's got an opinion, everyone's got a view, everyone wants to say what they want to say, so to speak. And sometimes people don't say what they want to say because they feel intimidated. All I can say in this situation as the leader, and this is where I define leadership, you need to live by example. Now, of course, when thinking about an example, it's like, okay, what's the standard? How are we measuring that? And by default, we measure example based on good, lovingness, being a person that people aspire towards. And so that requires you to not take things or to manage your emotions when it may feel like a personal attack in certain situations. It means having a certain level of composure and stoicism. It means having a certain level of lightness and professionalism that people can aspire towards. And so this is where you're showing good transparency, but you're also in a situation where you're not necessarily being compromised by. So it's flexible firmness, so to speak. And it's understanding it's not that deep, actually. There are ways that we can maneuver in different situations. So thinking about this, just understand, how can you develop your self-awareness in such a way where you can improve your level of composure and professionalism, so to speak. We also want to talk about trust. What does that look like? Really, trust is dependent upon a number of different things, one of them being rapport and another being vulnerability. And of course, if you don't put yourself in a position where you're creating a space, a psychological safe space to allow people to be vulnerable and to have rapport with you, then conversations are going to be very transactional. and they're not going to be transformational by nature. There are so many people who feel bullied or feel like they're not good enough or who don't feel valued because the leader has not created a space where that happens. They're micromanaging them. They're making them feel belittled. They're making them feel stupid. They're doing all these different things. It's not fair. It's totally not fair on a person. And so bearing this in mind, you as the leader have the responsibility to check yourself and to ensure the well-being of your staff, but also delivery of what aims to be delivered. So think about all of this stuff when it comes to really managing your team and speaking to people. Use encouraging and empowering language, okay? This is where different workshops may come into play. Workshops that help to build this sense of trust. I've done some of these workshops before, and it's amazing how trusting and untrusting certain individuals are. But it reveals something about their personal life as opposed to yours. So these are things that we all need to work on. And we have to remember that the personal is the professional. It's just in a different environment. So bear all of this in mind. Now, as promised, I'm going to talk about some stuff in the bonus content, which is all centered around negotiation. Okay, negotiation is a really important one. It's all centered around persuasion, influence, etc., etc. Now, in any form of negotiations, you're going to have to be thinking about some of the following things. Number one, you need to be very prepared. Okay? What stance does this other person have that you're trying to get them to not see or see? How prepared are you? Okay? How prepared are you when it comes to doing the research, the data to support your argument? In this situation, okay, when I spoke about ethos, logos, and pathos, this stuff will come into play because the body of work that you produce to, again, allow the person to see what you see is going to be very important. So create a logical and structured way of gathering information to provide your evidence. You know, at least half an hour of preparation is far better than doing nothing. Think about all the different scenarios that you have in mind that could happen. What are the different outcomes? If there is a bad outcome, what are the different bad outcomes? If there is a good outcome, what are the different good outcomes? Stress test the situation and think about solutions and mitigations to overcome these different things. Really important, you know. The more prepared you are, the better. Also think about rapport. What sort of rapport do you have with this individual? How can you start to build that rapport slowly but surely? Ask them about themselves. You know, what's happening in their lives? How are they finding work or business or whatever it may be? Because these little things may help to leverage your negotiation skills. Also, when you're doing the negotiating, don't be afraid to use silence. They talk about this in sales or closing. You know, they say never obviously talk about the price, and obviously for good reason, because you need to try to understand what's happening from that person's standpoint before you even talk about price, especially if you've got a bespoke package. The same thing comes into play when it comes to negotiation. Let them do the talking. Let them talk, understand what they're saying, and based on your preparation and understanding the different outcomes, you have a better opportunity to respond more effectively. This is really important stuff. But saying all of this stuff is key when you understand that it's about making sure that you stay firm to what it is that you're trying to negotiate. So that whole topic of flexible firmness or firm flexibility comes into play here. You need to be grounded in what your root argument is or negotiation is, but have some ways of being flexible where you slowly edge in towards getting what it is that you're aiming to get. So don't be rigid, because once you're fully rigid, nope, this is how it's being done, I don't care what anyone says, yeah, you may have blown your cover. Whereas in the long term, your flexibility has enabled you to get what you need to get. So bear this in mind when it comes to this stuff here. And of course, when it comes to like closing the session or whatever it may be, add a certain level of, I want to say humility, add sincerity and grace towards it, okay? You don't want any fireworks. You want things to be diffused. You want things to be at a certain nice level. And you want to continue working with this person in a good capacity. Of course, you need to reflect and learn upon what happened so that if negotiations have to happen again, if there's another round, then let there be another round. But you keep on going until you get what you need or want. So hopefully this bonus tip has given you an idea of how you can overcome certain challenges. Now, of course, today we spoke about multiple different things. We spoke about how do you craft a good communications plan or message based on identifying your stakeholders. We spoke about how you can be more persuasive in terms of your different communication styles. We also spoke about really good active listening and all these different things to help you be more effective. Take this stuff on board and really see if you can implement it into your space. Now, if you're interested in more things centered around leadership, life management, and portfolio careers, then feel free to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And as always, my friends, understand, reach, and expand. Peace.